Our next speaker is the coordinator of the Indian Education Program and one of the founders and program director of Masabikong Ojibwe Immersion Program at Lowell Elementary here in Duluth. She is an Ojibwe Kwe from the Leech Lake Nation, but has lived in Duluth for most of her life. She enjoys traveling, running in the woods, and spending time with her family. Are we good? Can't see? Almost, yep. With her story, Ojibwe Mod Nokomis, please welcome Edye House.
Buju Kinoa, Makwanina Dudem, Gaja Squadra me Kagan Dunjaba. Niswen in the Janisa, Kagej and Akazon and Danis, Hasamegijik, Gae Mekiziwap, Ningozasak. Mindamoye is in Akazon and Mama, now Quaj and Akazon and Abem, Esiban and Bun is in Akazon no Comisiban. Edye House is in Akaz Indigenous Akaz Jaganashimo. Duluth Public Schools in Danoki. So I originally was not on the bill to speak at Ignite Learning. And it happened during a time when I was out of the district for business and there was a snow day. And when I returned, I was asked by Tammy if I'd be willing to be one of the speakers. And I thought about it for about 24 hours. And I humbly accepted because of the topic of learning. And the way that she posed the questions was saying, it doesn't have to be classroom learning. And that's what triggered me to want to share. Because I feel like when we talk about learning in society, we talk about classroom learning. And what I'm about to share with you all tonight is something that I learned from my grandmother. Because to me, that's what real learning is. I spent a lot of my lifetime trying to figure out what it is that I wanted to do as a career. And I kept coming back to education. And education for me wasn't always the best. Rebecca and Patty talked a little bit about boarding schools. I started my career in education in kindergarten. I was one of the two Ojibwe students that went to Congdon Elementary, me and my sister. And so we went through there for a few years. My family moved, and we ended up at Grant. And so, you know, when we talk about education and we talk about our experiences, to me, that's how I learn. I learn through experiences. And I've also learned along the way that in order to end up in a career that I want to be in, I have to eventually get a formal education. And so at some point in my older adult life, I did go back to school, and I went into a teacher training program at the college at St. Scholastica. I went on the fast track and went 3.5 years, and I graduated with almost a triple major, but I didn't want to take one more history course, so I graduated with a double major, being in education, not K, but 512, social studies, and then also a degree in Ojibwe language and culture education. And so through that process, in that formal education, it took me down a path of thinking about my learning experiences internally. And someone had mentioned earlier about the process of kind of looking internal to figure out how you want to be externally, or that's how you're learning. You have to dig deep into yourself. And so through my education, my formal education at St. Scholastica, I spent a lot of time thinking about the things that impacted me in my life in order for me to be where I am today. And so I'm going to take you all on a journey. And my title, as Tammy shared, is called Ojibwe Mud Nokomis, which translates When My Grandma Speaks. When I was younger, about 3 years old, my mother, it was me and my mother and my older sister. And she decided that where we lived, which was a small rural village on the Leech Lake Reservation, where there was only one road in and one road out. Everyone knew each other. Everyone knew everyone's business. That was a time when my mother was in the process of getting a divorce from my father, and that was frowned upon back in the day. And so my mom decided to pick us up and move us away. And we tried a few months in Minneapolis, too big for my mom, so she moved us to Duluth. And it just so happened that where we lived, where we decided to kind of settle ourselves, was right smack dab in the middle of what we would call Central Hillside now. 4th Street and 8th Avenue, east to be exact. And we moved in, we got settled. Me and my sisters by then, went and played outside, and right next door, there was this lady sitting on her couch, or on her chair on her porch. It was kind of like a couch. She was settled, and she was drinking a cup of tea, and at the time, I just kept staring at her. And it got to the point where one day I just kind of went and sat with her, and I got to know her, and being that my mother relocated us from her family to Duluth, our neighbor, she kind of adopted us. And so she was like my grandma. And so I called her Grandma. She wasn't really my grandma, but those of you that know those types of relationships, it just so happened to be that she didn't have any grandchildren yet. And we just showed up, and I was friendly enough, and she was friendly enough, and we bonded. And so throughout the many years that we lived there, I spent a lot of time with her. And that was back in the day when, you know, those washing machines that had like the little roller things, and you had to be careful so you didn't get your fingers stuck in those. That was her washing machine. And I remember spending weekends with her. And she was doing laundry. And one weekend, she started talking in Ojibwe about the process of pick it up, put it in the washer, do all these things. And I was looking at her like, you know, wow. And I said, what are you talking? Like, what are you talking about? What are you saying? And she explained to me. Because as I explained earlier, my mother moved us away from a small village on the Leech Lake Reservation, where currently that's where a majority of our first language speakers of Ojibwe live today. And so part of me was angry because my mom moved me away from that, but part of me was grateful because where we ended up. I ended up with a grandmother that was a first language speaker. And so I spent many hours with her, listening to her talk about the weather. She talked about the cars going by. Sometimes she described the people that walked by because we did live on 4th Street. There was a lot of commotion. Probably still is. So we spent a lot of time sitting together, and she shared so much Ojibwe language with me. And at the time, I didn't realize what a gift I had sitting right there next to me. So as I got older, I realized that that's a part of me that I felt like I've always been missing, is my language. Because Ojibwe language for me is what keeps me grounded in who I am as an Ojibwe Kwe. That means Ojibwe woman. And it brings me back to, like I said, staying grounded in who I am as an Ojibwe person. But also, our language is a way of life. And I realized all those years, that's what she was sharing with me. She was sharing with me and teaching me through our language, this is how to be in this society. This is how to be in the world. This is how to walk gently, how to be caring and gentle on yourself, but also to be able to stand up and be proud of who you are based on where you come from in your language. And so, as I got older and started my own family, my daughter in particular, my grandma was still alive when my daughter was born, and my daughter's now 23. And I would bring her to go and visit her because I wanted her to make a connection, because I did not grow up with grandma, blood grandma. I had her as my grandma. So I tried to make those connections, and she was getting older, as grandmas do. And I tried to just keep that connection for my kids. And I realized through that process that was my responsibility. I couldn't put it on her because she was getting older. So what was I to do? And it was at the point where in my life, and I don't want to speak too much on behalf of Nahakwe's life, but I feel like that was a time where we both kind of figured out, like, we need to figure out language. We need to learn our language for our children. And to this day, our daughter still kind of questions, why wasn't Ojibwe my first language? Because with our son, that was his first language until he went to kindergarten. And I feel through that process of holding on to our language and learning through our language and teaching our kids our language, it helps them be better people. It helps them be able to maneuver the education system with confidence. And I feel that's something that my grandmother taught me, but I didn't realize it when I was younger. I didn't realize it till I was older and kind of sat back while I was in college thinking about the process of learning and who made the hugest impact on me in my life. And it was her. And it was her speaking to me in Ojibwe Moan. So, with that, like I said, as I got older and I started my own family and I raised my family, I tried to raise my family around language. There was a point where I was in formal education trying to learn my language, trying to relearn some of the things that I heard from my grandmother. And it was a struggle, because sometimes with learning language as an Ojibwe person, there's a whole lot of negative stereotypes that kind of come out. Rebecca and Patty talked a little bit about historical trauma and education in the history and boarding schools and those types of things, that it's historical trauma. It's intergenerational trauma. And so there was a point in my own life where I felt like maybe I shouldn't learn my language or continue this legacy that my grandmother started, because it possibly could be easier to navigate the education system without it. But being able to see how my kids flourished and how confident they were, and for me to watch them every single day, I was like, I can't think like that. I have to wipe all that away, move forward, grasp my language, hold on to the words and the love that my grandmother gave me, and move forward. So, how has this impacted my life? I feel like it's still impacting my life. It's impacting my children's lives. I feel like on some level, it impacts my friends' lives because I'm always saying, we need to learn our language, or we need to reclaim our language. Let's figure out how to say that in Ojibwe. It'll sound cooler. Why are we taking on the colonizer's language? Why don't we just come back to ours? That's what we need to do. So I feel like it's impacted my life, and still is. I feel like it has impacted my children's lives. And I feel like it's trickling into the work that I do. When Tammy introduced me, she had mentioned that I'm one of the founders of the Masabikang Ojibwe Language Immersion Program here for Duluth Public Schools. That didn't happen by mistake. We kind of pushed, and when I started with Duluth Public Schools, I was asked a question, what's one of your goals in life? And I said to start an Ojibwe immersion program, because I was thinking back to my grandma and thinking about how amazing it felt to learn from her, and how it trickled into my children's lives, and how amazing it was to see them speak our language and feel confident about it. And I feel like that helps them and continues to help them navigate the education system. So I did a proposal. We have Masabikang Ojibwe language program now. It's 3 years old. So when I talk about trickling down, not from my grandmother to me, to my kids, and now to the kids in our program. And I feel like I need to continue that legacy that I was taught by my grandmother with our language. And as an Ojibwe person, we're taught to share our gifts. And I feel like that is a gift that I need to continue to share. That's a gift that I need to continue to grow for myself in order to carry that legacy for my grandmother. And I hope that someday, not anytime soon, because my kids are still little, not real little, but they're too little to start their own families, 16 and 23, still too little to start their own families. But I do hope someday that I can be sitting out in the audience and I can have one of my kids up on a stage sharing this legacy of Ojibwe language learning. And hopefully I can convince them, maybe not my daughter, but maybe my son, I can convince him to say that he's continuing that legacy and that he will eventually be able to share the language with his kids, to someday have grandkids that could say, yeah, Ojibwe wan nokomis, when my grandmother speaks. Miigwech miu. Am I still on? I realized that I didn't do a translation. Are you all okay with that? Or would you like me to translate what I was speaking in Ojibwe earlier? So I greeted you all. I said I'm from Bear Clan. I'm from the Leech Lake Nation. But I currently live in Duluth. I have 3 kids. Kageana Kudukwe is my daughter. Hasame Kishik and Megiziweb are my sons. My mother's name is Mindamuye. My husband's name is Naokwe. My grandmother's name was Asipun, which translates into a loose translation of raccoon. And I said, my name in English is Edye House, and I currently work for Duluth Public Schools. I'm used to not translating, but I realized in a crowd such as this that I should probably translate. So, and when I say good to meet you, I say thank you. That's it. And if I had a mic, I'd drop it.